So, a new INEC chairman soon, but a familiar debate as the president prepares to present his choice of who will head Nigeria's Electoral Commission, a chairman who will be tasked with conducting and superintending this country's next presidential election in less than 2 years from now, amid widespread public mistrust. It's an appointment that raises concern about independence and impartiality, as many argue that presidential appointments can compromise the Commission's autonomy. Former INEC chairman Atahiru Jega suggests that the president's role in appointing the INEC chairman should be minimized to prevent perceptions of partisanship. In contrast, the UK's Electoral Commission, for instance, has a more complex appointment process. The Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission recommends candidates who are then approved by Parliament and appointed by the King. This approach aims to maintain the Commission's independence. So, what's the best way forward for Nigeria? Could the nomination of a new INEC chairman come to be the defining political appointment of President Tinubu's first term in office? It's a confoundingly difficult one, isn't it? Well, to try to help us think this through, who better to talk to than Professor Fidelis Odita? He's been described as one of the most accomplished legal minds in Britain, Nigeria, and Africa today. He's a King's Counsel in the UK and a senior advocate of Nigeria, and holds 3 postgraduate degrees from Oxford. He's also president of the Nigerian branch of the International Law Association and runs a successful legal practice in both Nigeria and the UK. Not to forget the fact that he is a former governorship aspirant in Delta State. And Professor Odita joins me now on the line from Lagos. Prof, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate your joining us. So who will be the right person in your assessment to help restore confidence in Nigeria's electoral system?
Thank you very much, Charles. And just a point of correction on the intro. I'm now the former president of Nigerian branch of the International Law Association. I've handed over to a new regime, so I have moved on. But to come back to your question, obviously I think the starting point should be to articulate what the qualities of an INEC chairman should be. In my view, the INEC chairman needs to be someone who is impartial, someone who is independent, someone who has integrity, someone who has competence, someone who is accountable, someone who is reasonably professional, and someone who can be trusted to act fairly. I noticed in your intro, you said there is widespread public mistrust, and I think for good reason. No one who has witnessed recent elections in Nigeria, especially the 2023 elections, can have very good things to say about INEC. It is a matter of profound regret that Professor Mahmood was allowed to go without telling Nigerians what glitches prevented the transmission of the presidential election results. That's a key element of impartiality, a key element of independence, a key element of fairness, and more importantly, a key element of accountability. He simply said he just said glitches until today. And he's left without telling us, obviously feeling unaccountable to anyone. So these qualities we need to hold highly and to evaluate anyone who is coming forward to hold the position of INEC chairman. Because of course, as you know, credible elections are very important. They help to strengthen the institutions of the state. They help to enhance the rule of law. They are obviously necessary for political accountability. and obviously legitimacy, because credible elections produce credible leaders, and such leaders are said to be legitimate because they're exercising powers in the name of people. But where you have an incompetent or corrupt or fraudulent electoral umpire, then the outcome cannot be trusted, and we'll be back again to square one. But in my view, the solution is not really legislation. You cannot legislate for these qualities. The issue has always been one of governance. How do you produce men and women of integrity, of independence, who are fair-minded, who are fairly reasonably professional, who are independent and honest, and who can deliver to Nigerians credible elections? Those are the things that the president should be concerned about. And this is one issue that he shouldn't politicize by looking at his own interests and seeing someone who could be controlled politically.
Yeah, those are points on which many Nigerians will agree. But of course, we won't know how that person will conduct elections, I mean, after they're nominated and appointed, until they actually conduct elections. So what will cause the warning bells to toll for you when the new INEC chairman is announced? Will it be where he or she comes from, what election experience they have, what their track record of service is, all of the above, or something else?
I think all of the above, and I think we have to be careful. I don't think myself that the solution lies in just appointment of professors. There's nothing against, I don't have anything against professors, but I don't see that the process of attaining professorship necessarily prepares one for the chairmanship of INEC. And in saying that, I do not mean at all to disparage or to put down professors, but of course it is important to emphasize that just being a professor, professing knowledge of a particular area of human endeavor does not qualify one to be an INEC commissioner, let alone an INEC chairman. And of course we remember that in the 2019 elections, 2 professors were convicted for fraudulent electoral conduct in Akwa Ibom. I think there was one Peter Ogban or Ogan, and there was a man called Professor Ignatius Uduk. Both of them were no doubt professors, but they were convicted of electoral fraud committed in the conduct of Akwa Ibom senatorial and state assembly elections. So one has to be a little skeptical about the wisdom of thinking that professorship by itself is a conclusive requirement for the chairmanship. And of course, if we were to judge by Professor Mahmood, his tenure was totally disgraceful. And yet, this is a man who was supposed to be a professor and who conducted what one might regard as one of the most fraudulent elections in the history of Nigeria. So I think we have to be quite careful. And that's where I emphasize that you need to look at people who are competent, people who have some experience of conducting elections, or people who can be trained in a short while to become, because of their wide exposure to public service similar to the conduct of elections. But I don't think we can just pluck someone from somewhere because he or she is a professor and then say that is enough. I don't think it is. And I think with all due respect to those professors, many of them are extremely poor and therefore very susceptible to being corrupt.
Yes, I mean, I think you make a point, at least to the extent that the names of professors, I mean, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but the names that are floating around in the public space at the moment are of professors who are being mooted as possible replacements for Professor Yakubu. And you're right in the sense that there is a feeling that, and in fact it is a fact, that they make very little money, some of them, not professors like yourself who are sort of Oxford, UK and all the rest of it, but in fact their union is threatening to go on strike because of money issues. And you raised a question, Professor Odita, and I wondered whether you could expand on that a bit, whether you think it's perhaps time to look at appointing people from maybe within the Commission who have the experience of not only conducting many elections, but also the knowledge of what the challenges are and the integrity to resist being compromised. I mean, surely they can't all be rotten eggs inside INEC, can they?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a matter of common knowledge that most professors are paid about 500,000 to 600,000 a month. For goodness sake, a man or woman who is paid less than 10 million naira a year is being entrusted with the conduct of elections involving mainly crooked Nigerian politicians who want to win at all costs. And who will offer anything to be returned elected. I think that we must be very careful about that because hunger is a very important conditioner of human behavior and conduct. A man or woman could claim to have integrity, but when confronted with hunger, it might do things which, had he or she been not even affluent, had he or she been able to feed properly, would have resisted the pressure. And I just don't see how someone who is coming from an income of 500,000 or 600,000 a month and now being entrusted with a budget of over 100 billion to implement, first of all, and then being faced with the temptations which we know come from Nigerian politicians is ideal to hold that type of position. On the contrary, I think that we should also emphasize competence and experience and professionalism, factors which will point to maybe an internal candidate, because it's unthinkable to bring a layperson to be, say, a Chief Justice of Nigeria, or indeed to head any professional organization. And I think it's a mistake to look at INEC and think it's not a professional organization. You require a long time to learn the processes, the electoral processes, and there is no reason why someone who has been there for 5 years or 10 years or 8 years cannot be qualified. And in many respects, you would expect that such internal candidates are likely to be better than external candidates, provided they have the necessary qualities of impartiality, independence, integrity, professionalism, competence, fairness, and they are also reasonably good communicators. So the obsession with going to look for someone outside just as a matter of political patronage doesn't seem to me to be a right move. And I'm very concerned about the integrity of these elections because, as I always say, I don't see any difference between a leadership which is procured by force and a leadership which is procured by fraud. Where you have an election which is not credible because the leadership is incompetent or dishonest or unfair or partial or susceptible to political influence, the outcome is likely to be that there is a fraudulent election. And there is no difference between fraud and force. In neither case is there mandate. In the first case, the mandate is vitiated by force. In the second case, the mandate is vitiated by fraud. But in neither case is there mandate. So it's very important that we get these things right and that we appoint a man or woman who has these qualities and who has competence and some experience. You cannot come from ground zero and then come to manage a complex process like a Nigerian election.
Indeed. And in terms of reforms of this country's electoral system, I mean, you've got the administrative, you've got the legal, you've got the human. I mean, do you agree with those who say that it is the human agency that is left, people taking money, doing the wrong things, because according to them, the laws are already there. So the problem is the reform of the appointment process, isn't it?
Completely. So, in my view, the legal framework for the conduct of free and fair and credible elections in Nigeria exists. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the existing 2022 Electoral Act and the INEC guidelines issued pursuant thereto. The problem is that those rules and regulations are not self-implementing. They have to be implemented by men and women who have integrity, who have competence, who are impartial, who are fair, and who are honest. But where do you find them? So I agree with you, the problem we have is governance. In fact, in my view, there are two levels of governance problems that we have with elections in Nigeria. The first is lack of integrity of many of the electoral officers, the umpires, people you expect to be impartial, people you expect to be independent, people you expect to be honest, people you expect to be fair, people you expect to be competent. As in, say in Nigeria, they fall your hands because they are exactly the opposite. But beyond that, there is also the governance at the level of the courts. The reason why there is so much election litigation is because of incompetent and corrupt conduct of elections. But when you then go to the courts, you now find that you are faced with a completely different challenge. The interpretation, the electoral jurisprudence, you can say, is almost fraudulent. And a lot of it is incredible. And you're just asking yourself, how could anyone who understands what the objective of the exercise is interpret the law in this way? For example, in relation to the transmission of results to IREV, we know we have Section 60, subsection 5 of the Electoral Act, which says the INEC should make regulations prescribing how electoral results should be transmitted. And we know that we have Regulation 38, sub 5, which says that the electoral results, together with the BVAS, should be transmitted to IREV, which is INEC Election Reporting Portal. But what did the Supreme Court say in all the cases involving the presidential candidates? It said INEC, notwithstanding the clear requirement that it should be transmitted, it wasn't transmitted. All were told election glitches. But what did the Supreme Court say? The Supreme Court held that subsidiary legislation, such as the INEC guidelines, cannot make unlawful something which is permitted by the Act. But there is no provision in the Act which says that you can transmit election results manually. So when you have that type of very dodgy jurisprudence, it just gives encouragement to a fraudulent electoral umpire to do what he or she pleases, to thwart and divert the will of the people, and to project people who have no mandate or legitimacy.
Absolutely. And of course, it is important to remember that how a president will be remembered after office is determined by the choices and decisions he makes while serving. And this is one of the really big ones. I mean, I'm sure you remember President Goodluck Jonathan is still being celebrated today because of the people he appointed to INEC, people who ultimately, at least the perception is, that they improve the integrity of the electoral process in the country. I mean, he appointed the likes of Professor Atahiru Jega as chairman, and two other respected people from civil society, Professor Lai Olurode and Barrister Mikey Guinea, who helped to rebrand INEC and to restore sort of public confidence after those rigged elections of 2007. So how much does all that raise the stakes for President Tinubu?
They do actually raise the stakes, but we've seen that President Tinubu has been appointing largely from the southwest, including Kwara, for this purpose. And I think that he must resist that, because I mean, you can't want to claim legitimacy to govern a complex and big country like Nigeria and restrict most of your appointments to the southwest. And saying that, I'm not saying the people from the Southwest are not competent. Obviously they are, and the criteria cannot be which area of Nigeria you come from. The criteria must be competence, professionalism, integrity, fairness, independence, impartiality, and so on. But what I'm saying is that those qualities exist elsewhere. They are not limited to the Southwest, and President Tinubu has shown a particular penchant to appoint mostly from the Southwest, and I think it is unfortunate. In this respect, he must rise above petty regional and ethnic sentiments, and he must rise beyond petty politicking and try and show his stature as a statesman and appoint someone whom Nigerians can have confidence in and say that he has done a good job. I don't think simply restricting his choice to people of his own ethnic extraction will meet that aspiration. And it's good you mention people like Professor Atahiru Jega and Mike Igini, obviously people of great integrity. I remember that when Mr. Igini was appointed, most of the areas where there were difficulties in the election, he was sent to. He went to Edo, and I think when there was an inconclusive election in Imo State, he was the one that was sent there to solve the problem. And I remember on one of the interviews he gave on television, he said he was sent to Akwa Ibom to count votes, not to count money, obviously referring to the fact that politicians there must have tried to bribe him. Clearly, we need people of that quality to occupy the seat of the chairmanship of INEC.
So basically, someone who's efficient, honest, with a strong weight of endorsement from the Nigerian people, can deliver results, will serve the people, not the president. I've got to say, Professor Odita, brilliant as always talking with you and for your sterling contributions. Professor Odita, as I'm sure you can see, is one of the most accomplished legal minds in Britain, Nigeria, and Africa today. He's a King's Counsel in the UK and a senior advocate of Nigeria, holds 3 postgraduate degrees from Oxford, and was the former president of the Nigerian branch of the International Law Association. He was talking to me on the line from Lagos. Thank you very much indeed.